Hello, everybody. Hey, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Corey Marks. I'm Director of Creative Writing. I'm thrilled you're here. We've had some craziness today, so sadly, one of our events earlier was canceled. The Q&A was canceled because Kathleen was trapped on a plane that refused to go because it had like a leaky coffee maker or something. I don't know what's up with that. I assume you finally got good coffee, though.
I didn't have it, but I hope so.
I hope so. Okay, well, the first thing I want to make sure about is that you got your bubble sheet for the exam that will happen at the end of the reading. If you don't have one, just run up and grab one over here. It's not a very long exam, but it does count for most of your grade this semester. So you saw coming in books for sale. Please make sure that you buy a copy of the book, and Kathleen Graber will sign books afterwards, right up front here. So come up and chat with her and get her to sign your book. Before we start, though, I want to announce a couple of events that are coming in the next few weeks. This is our first Visiting Writers event for the year, but our next one is coming on October 28th, so coming up pretty soon. And we have fiction writer Claire Vaye Watkins reading. So come to that. It's in the very same room that we're in now. And then not long after that, we have our very own Jill Talbot, who's here teaching nonfiction for us this year, who's going to read on November 10. So we're thrilled that she's going to have a chance to share her work with us. So come hear her as well. Cell phones, you should turn them off. Or, maybe what you should do because of the experiences that Kathleen's had today, put them on airplane mode. That's probably the best thing to do, right? But make sure you don't spend time texting stuff. I mean, if you're looking up things on Google, to understand the poems, maybe. She explains it all. You don't need Google. You have the writer here. This is one of those moments where Google doesn't help. So I'd like to now invite Jessica Murray up. Jessica Murray is a PhD poetry student here in our program, and she's going to do the real important introduction of Kathleen Graber. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm excited to introduce Kathleen this evening. Kathleen Graber is the author of two collections of poetry, Correspondence and The Eternal City, which was a finalist for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the winner of the Library of Virginia Literary Award for Poetry. A recipient of fellowships from the Rona Jaffe Foundation, the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Guggenheim Foundation, she has been a Hodder Fellow at Princeton University and an Amy Lowell Traveling Scholar. She's currently the Director of Creative Writing at Virginia Commonwealth University. Kathleen Graber's first book, Correspondences, begins with two epigraphs from Walter Benjamin that reminds us how the collector takes up the struggle against dispersion and how every passion borders on the chaotic, but the collector's passion borders on the chaos of memories. In her long, supple lines, Graber engages memory in its most expansive sense, not only the personal, but also the historical and the philosophical as it pertains to literature and art. In these poems, we see the language of waitresses in a contemporary diner in conversation with Eugenio Montale, the conversation of the poet and her father engaged with a speech of strangers and a passage from Benjamin. However, Graber remains skeptical of the collector's impulse to catalog and categorize, to impose a definitive order. Her poem, The Letters, a mnemonic for forgetting, E is for elegies or enough to be counted, begins with an epigraph from Larry Levis. The poet deliberately, skillfully, insouciantly, cunningly, faithfully, unforgivably forgets. It is the only kind of forgetting which is also a form of remembering. From the poem. I'm not in love with anyone anymore, Levis writes in 83. But the form of stone is the form of attrition. It becomes itself through what is lost, the way tumbling a song on a jukebox, quarter after quarter, will make you blind to its music. Annihilation, we might call it, by a brutal adolescent affection, that other circuit to forgetting. As implausible as it might seem, the width of memory, like a record's groove, uninscribing itself with use. Graber's poems are interested in the forgotten, the discarded, in the act of repurposing. In Correspondence's opening poem, Between Laurelton and Locust Manor, the speaker asks, isn't this art, this careful arrangement of what is useless, The poem offers us this answer. But I spy a red rowboat on sawhorses in the morning of every day. Somebody come tell me that's not a kind of faith. Somebody say that's not the kind of sign we should expect from a god. Graeber's first collection invites our participation in the mysterious and even incommunicable by inviting us to reconsider what we think we know. In her second book, The Eternal City, that gives the collection its title and overarching exploration, quote, is meant to be a metaphor for the mind, a timeless landscape in which the past and present, the fictional and actual, the elevated and quotidian live side by side. In this way, The Eternal City begins where correspondences ends. However, if correspondences sounds the depths of grief and longing, the death of a father, a mother, the desire for a child, or even connection with strangers, Angels Unawares suggests that the poet is after different, if related, explorations here. The old stories suggest the grasshopper, like us, is thirsty for wisdom, yet slow to be taught. Perhaps everything it knows must come to it then, in some other way. Scholars at Cambridge, presented with Ramanujan's theorems, concluded they must be true even though they couldn't understand them, because if they were not true, who would have had the imagination to invent them? Graeber's poem reminds us how often our desire for knowledge, understanding, is often only matched by our resistance, how it is finally the play of our imagination that provides some other way. Angels Unawares ends, perhaps if we are ever visited at all, it is meant to be like this, not an annunciation, but a consolation, the page on which it is written, folded into a tiny packet and lashed with brown twine to a stone. The philosophy that Marcus Aurelius wrote as his own consolation is at the heart of Graeber's 12-poem sequence, Eternal City. In this sequence, Graeber takes an epigraph from Meditations as a place from which to explore how current the concerns of the past remain in the present. In Book 8, a discussion of the fate of the Roman Empire as it passes from Aurelius to a son who reveled in violence, frames a discussion of hopes and fears for the soon-to-be-born child of a friend. Today, my friend, just in the door from teaching Lear to college freshmen, phones from across the country. He, too, is going to be a dad. He's known for months but was afraid to say, what if something had gone wrong? These sons are noble sons, and their sons will be as well. It is a shame to be surprised if it has been, after all, a good thing to have been born. We bow our heads not in fear of what they will become, but for fear of the fever, the crescent-pointed arrow of simply being flesh, the tender arena within which there is already nothing they can do. This sequence of poem takes as the first line of the next the last line of the poem before, reminding us, as the poet asks in Book 7, what morning isn't implicated in every other. Graeber's poems take an incredibly wide lens, but they also resist the sentiment that history, the very distant past, can ever be known to us, no matter what we think we may recognize. In an essay on Aurelius that inspired Graeber, the poet Joseph Brodsky says, history is not a discipline, but something that is not yours, which is the main definition of beauty. Graeber's poems are beautiful for the way that they lead us, like that proverbial grasshopper, towards some other way by engaging the past while honoring its fundamental strangeness and inaccessibility. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Kathleen Graeber.
I think that's the best introduction I've ever gotten. Honestly, it's so thoughtful. It made it sound like I knew what I was doing, which is always a good thing. So yeah, I had a great day in the airport in Chicago, but I'm here now. So what I thought I would do was read some mostly new poems, but then read poems from The Eternal City, which I think some of you have been reading in class. And then I think even, do I have one in here? I usually try. Thought I was going to try to read a poem from correspondence, but I may have. I had so much time. I kept shuffling the deck of what to read. I think now there's nothing from correspondence. How's that possible? All right. We'll see what happens. Let me just look at the clock so that it's down there. Okay, great. I don't want to go on forever. So in the Eternal City, there's a series of, for me, short poems. For a regular person, they would be medium-length poems that address Marcus Aurelius. But in this new book that I'm working on, there's a series of poems that are direct addresses to the country, to America. And so this is one of them. This is called America Trains. I spent some time. I'm going to just introduce why I would do that. It's something that's been done a lot in the past. We all have things we want to talk to America about privately. I spent some. I had this fellowship. Sometimes it's called the Banishment Prize. And you have to leave the continent of North America for a calendar year. And so when I was away for a year, I was able to see the country a little bit differently. I actually, I never, if you'd asked me, I would have said I would never miss America. I grew up in a family that was kind of complicated relationship to nationalism. But I did. Anyway, so these are sort of some poems to the country, America. By the time I got to the box elder, the cricket was already dead. I had found it in the closet, chirping between two shoes, and trapped it in a tumbler, holding a postcard across the rim. But its legs were too strong, or its fear, and in a moment it destroyed itself, propelling itself again and again against the glass. Let us tell ourselves it was merely stunned by the collision, that it revived later, coming to as a sparrow might, exactly where I left it, in the grass. Let me say I was merely trying to do the right thing. I keep thinking of the Chinese proverb, you have to catch your own luck. Last week in Longmont, Colorado, just down the street from where my brother lives, a girl, 18, a college freshman, lost both her legs trying to catch a freight train with two friends, just for kicks. And I think of my uncle, hungry, broke, hopping across the early 30s until he could land a job with my father, working the custodial night shifts at Greystone, mopping floors as mad, insomniac women pounded their heads against the bars. 3 economic analysts report the dawn of a new reality. America, neither I nor any of this exists. There is only the plutonomy, and the rest is merely, as they say, the rest. And yet the tracks still run beside the white, monumental chicken processing plant at the end of Main Street. It's an old red brick cowboy town, and the train slows right there as it intersects the road. I've sat mesmerized, oh, the immensity of the West, in a rental car at the crossing, watching it pass and pass. I don't remember ever thinking I was invincible, though I must have thought you were, though now we say that's what all kids think. You are our world body, you who taught us each thing wants only to be more. So right now I live in Richmond, Virginia. It is the thrift capital of America. Although I have to say, it looked like there were some really good thrift stores downtown. We did not get a chance to visit any of those, unfortunately, today. If only my plane had been on time. But one of the things that I think you heard in the introduction is that I have this problem with objects. I really love them. I love their tangibility. I want to touch them all the time. And so it's sometimes that manifests in collecting, but I try not to cross over into hoarding. But this is called the River Twice, and you know that probably that Heraclitus fragment, you can't step in the same river twice. Right? It's the part that never gets quoted is that because it is never the same river, and you are never the same person. It's actually, they said the word is man. So a man can never step in the same river twice because it's never the same river, and he's never the same man. So this is called The River Twice, and it's about a thrift store in Richmond, an actual place, and the name of the thrift store is The Love of Jesus. That's the name of the store. The River Twice. The Love of Jesus is a thrift warehouse on the south side of town. Everything inside is $1. On Mondays and Fridays, everything is 50 cents. A stormy afternoon in June, and I drift for hours down the aisles. Bread machines and coffee pots, shirts and shoes, teetering stacks of mismatched dinnerware. I am studying a cup whose crackled glaze is the pale blue-green of beach glass. Two lions chase one another around its fragile eternity, the way the lover pursues the beloved on the ancient urn, their manes and legs washed in a preternatural purple and gold. Behind me, a woman tells her son William to get up from the floor so she can measure him against a pair of little boy's jeans. When he doesn't rise, she tells him she's going to start counting. She's only going to count to 2. When I look over, he is already on his feet at silent attention, his arms outstretched from his sides. I live in an attic apartment above 2 women who have been unemployed as long as I have known them. This week, the last of their benefits has been unexpectedly terminated by the state. A drop in the overall number of jobless automatically triggers the cessation of extensions, the letter that comes in the mail explains. Outside, thunder cracks. Later, the streets will be full of limbs. Heraclitus believed that in the beginning, creation simply bubbled forth, an inevitable percolating stream, logos, both reason and word, issuing from a source unseen. Sometimes I feel a sudden sorrow, as though my own emotions were a room I'd entered and forgotten why. My mother struck me only once for refusing to put on my coat. I was 4 years old, and she had been scrubbing motel room floors all day. I'd fallen asleep in the dark on a low shelf in the linen closet beside the boxes of little pink soaps. Today that shelf is gone, and the great white polar caps are melting. At Kisunga National Park in Malawi, a drought has caused the lions to turn on the rangers whose job it is to protect them. Our skulls are chipped bowls, broken globes we plunge into the flow. Heraclitus, whom the crash of time has left in fragments, saw in the cosmos a harmony of tensions. Imagine the lyre, he wrote, and the bow. The store radio plays satellite gospel. A hymn with a chorus, "Every moment you shall be judged," is followed by one in which the choir shouts, "Praise, stand up and be forgiven." All right. So I will read a poem about an actual authentic collection. This is a poem that I wrote during the Banishment Prize. The museum it's referring to is actually in Budapest, and it has an epigraph from the German literary critic Walter Benjamin, who's my intellectual boyfriend. Because in the Eternal City, it doesn't. You can still date when you're dead. So I don't know what to say about him, but anyway. So the quote is from this beautiful little essay that he wrote about his childhood around the turn of the century, the 19th century. It's called A Berlin Childhood around 1900, and he has these little chapters that are just about objects that meant a lot to him. And this one's called The Telephone. And it has an epigraph from Benjamin, and here it is. He says, "Just as the medium obeys the voice that takes possession of him from beyond the grave, I submitted to the first proposal that came my way through the telephone." the handmade copper phone of Austria's last emperor, and the telephone of Franz Joseph, a stark Soviet-era switchboard with buttons of an accordion, all of its connections laid out neatly in rows of black and white. Cranks and fiber optics, the ornate horn mouthpiece of an operator from 1892. At the Telephone Museum this morning, I am the only visitor. A quiet Sunday late in the summer season. Yet the matron, as ancient as the equipment, guides me dutifully through the displays, throwing a switch to call up an illuminated hologram of a statue. Where is the original? Honoring long distance. When she sends power into the frayed paper-coated cables of the city's original exchange, the massive matrix begins to hum and click and whir. And a long minute later, delight. The telephone beside me rings. For Benjamin, the technology is heroic. For it has prevailed, he says, like those unfortunate infants of myth who, cast out into the shadowy wilderness of the back halls, surrounded by bins of soiled linens and gas meters, emerge a consolation for loneliness, the light of a last hope, the home's benevolent king. In a novel by George Conrad, a man attempts to explain to his daughter why he has had so many lovers. When the clothes come off, he tells her, everything is discovered. And he goes on, it is, in the end, discovery we want. Though wouldn't even the most inventive among us find, after so much disrobing, simply more of what we already know? Shall I celebrate the counterpoint, the nearly infinite revelatory potential of a bolt of heavy silk run through the fingers of an able seamstress? Or the sensuous curve of the first desktop telephone, its molded black handset recumbent in a pair of slender chrome arms. Meaning, once I fell in love with the beautiful voice passing through the wire. I remember the drop of it, a man talking about something he'd read, turning a page with an audible rustle and breath, whispering, listen, these are the lines that haunt. It's not that the skin has no function, only that the tongue can play so many parts. At 17, I was haunted by those protagonists who had no interiors. Someone asks the hero, what do you really think of me? The hero's cold reply, I don't. In a month, the phone has sounded only once. On the end, a pre-recorded message playing in a language I'll never understand. Tomorrow, I think, will be a good day to wash the floors, though no one will visit. Solitude, liberation from even the expectation of being seen. Everything I do, I know I do for myself alone. Still, I'm thinking of you just now. Perhaps you'll call. It's a silly, outdated sentiment. Where is the glass case to hold it? And beside it, what shall we write? Oh, something human, something grand. So I have this monstrous poem right now in the middle. Does that just seem like a bad idea? It's got parts. Let's make believe it's 4 not so monstrously long poems. It's 4 kind of short poems instead of one really big poem. It's a new poem. It's called Impasto for the Parietal. I know, you're heading for the door now, right? Impasto is a kind of painterly technique where you just keep layering the paint on the canvas so that it almost becomes 3-dimensional. So you can see how this is a good metaphor for the poems, right? I just keep throwing it on. And the parietal is anything that has to do with walls. So I'm holding my head because we call these the parietal bones, the skull bones, the walls of your brain. And then the other meaning of parietal is often caves. And so they call cave paintings parietal art. So Impasto for the Parietals, this is about cave paint. In other words, this is a poem about cave paintings. Okay, and it's got an epigraph, because I love those. When you can't get it into the poem, you can throw more paint on the canvas by using the epigraph. By one of the students who discovered the cave paintings in France. Alone in that vastness, lit by the feeble beam of our lamps, we were seized by a strange feeling. Time was abolished, as if tens of thousands of years that separated us from the producers of these paintings no longer existed. There's a bunch of people in here you may never have heard of. But I'm going to tell you, Hiroshi Sugimoto is a photographer. He has a whole series of paintings that are, a whole series of photographs that are black and white, and they're just horizon shots of the sea. So they're all over the world, but it's exactly the same proportion. Sea, horizon, sky. That's it. So he's going to come up in here, and then there's a bunch of theorists. So Saussure is going to come up in here. It doesn't matter. You don't need to know who they are. Just act like I'm saying Bob said, John said, Sam thought this. Okay. Molly had an idea. Okay. Impasto for the Parietal. 1. After the anthropology students discovered the cave in Ardèche, they told the interviewer that they felt like intruders. They said they could feel the presence of the other souls around them. Everything was so beautiful, so fresh. My mother used to say that it was too easy to forget the beauty of the place we lived. And so lately, I have been trying to discover the sea by walking into the sea. In the evening, after work, after the lifeguards have all called it a day, I rarely go deeper than my waist or my chest, though when I was younger, I would push out past the breakers to float a long time on my back at dusk. And once in the late fall, when my retriever bolted so far out into the surf, he seemed only another bobbing dot of foam, I pulled off my shoes and socks and swam out above my head to haul him back. I don't know what I'm doing there alone now these days. I stare into the immensity, half thinking I am executing some moral obligation to stand on the earth as consciously as I can for as long as I am able. Or I think of the captured horizons of Hiroshi Sugimoto, who said that every time he views the sea, he feels as if he is visiting the home of his ancestors. No matter how cold the water is, I make myself dive again and again. Today, I overheard a young woman outside the library talking on her phone. When I told my grandmother that I hate him now, she said, "Oh, honey, you're a fool, 'cause that's just some other kind of love." Perhaps this is as close as most of us will ever come to the oracular. I have rarely known with any real depth or precision what it is I felt. That's the end of the first part. 2. Sometimes late at night I read the hypotheses, the possible meanings of the Paleolithic art, or I reread the old essays of Lauren Isley, who proposed all life might be a backward yearning toward the dark. There were mammals, he writes, after all, who had given up the land and returned to the sea, fish that slept in mud, birds that no longer flew. His is an apologia, equal parts ode and elegy, praise for what we might call a fierce curiosity and a lamentation for his boyhood friend, the rat, who used to guide their gang through the labyrinth of the city sewers before he died at 10 from an illness which today might easily be cured. Saussure thought every story was a story in which all the meanings lie between. Yet Freud believed there were subterranean passages, a world of desires that always remained closed, even to ourselves. The question for scholars has never been why paint, but why paint in a place so hidden? Of course, this is no longer a riddle anyone who will ever live will ever solve, though even across 35,000 years, it still seems to me unfathomable that the secret has been lost. Didn't someone always tell someone to pass it on? 3. In high school, I liked to walk along the shore and dream about the boy who sat in front of me in math class. How he wore his sun-bleached hair in a ponytail, and how he could solve the most difficult calculus equations at the board without effort, even though he'd just been outside at lunch with his friends getting stoned. The only living things were the little sandpipers and the black-headed laughing gulls. Though the rack line glittered with the broken, waxy garlands we called sea snakes, whose pouches contain hundreds of tiny whelks, and the cracked armature of the prehistoric horseshoe crab, barnacles fastened to their burnished back. Maybe it is because I wanted so much to be fathomed, as far as it is possible for a teenager to be, that he would never come near. He grew up to be a 6th grade teacher, and a coworker found him dead on his kitchen floor one day in December after he failed to show up for work. I like to tell myself none of this could have been any better than it was. The merely imagined, some uncontainable churn, always richer than the known. Or to say it another way, longing to is 3 parts salt. 4. Sometimes I open a book of colored plates and trace with my finger the curled bison sleeping on the ceiling at Altamira, the one delicately drawn deer nearby. Wrapped in silence, they only become even more of whatever it is they already are, urgent and archetypal, whether their images were meant to be a kind of magic or prayer or not. I have a friend who says she sometimes feels time collapse, the diachronic and the synchronic. But this has never happened to me. The furthest back thing I can recall is my grandmother's shoe. Sturdy, open-toed with laces. She lived in the green and white trailer behind our house, and each morning I sipped coffee with milk and sugar from her saucer before she buttoned my coat and walked us to church, our parish named for St. Anne, the mother of God. She folded her hands, I folded mine. Regarding the heart, I wanted to offer you a wilder, bolder being. But there is still only this mind in the cave, sadly adrift and self-aware, though even now the late sun washes, as it always has, the waves with its red light. Okay, so back to America, back to not a long poem. It's like changing it up, the rhythm. This one features a plane. I tried to put every plane poem I have on the agenda for this evening. This is the only other time I was going to a reading, and it did. Actually, that one didn't happen. We flew directly into a blizzard, and then after bouncing all over, the pilot came on and said, "We thought we could make it through the storm, but we're going to turn back." So yeah, it's a true story. Okay, America. I have a friend for whom everything went south after the death of her cat. It seemed melodramatic and hyperbolic to say so, though sometimes the melodramatic and hyperbolic are true. Another truth. She saw it coming, but there was nothing she could do. First, she adopted 2 feral kittens someone had found in a garage, and when that didn't work, she phoned the local shelter and took in 5 more. Like the everything that unfolded thereafter, the opening act was slower and more complicated than I am making it now. Today, I drove a long way to the airport in order to fly directly into a blizzard and back. Someone in a control tower somewhere should have known this was a bad idea. Something we all wake up early in order to discover we don't actually have to do. But there was no red alert from the airline in the inbox above the forwarded story of the tortoiseshell cat in Florida, which had found its way 200 miles home. America, because we would like to know where we are going and what we will find, scientists have released animals inside planetariums and tied magnets to the heads of turtles in order to prove that it is possible to set them off course. They have surgically removed most of the anatomy from living homing pigeons, and still we are stuck with the words instinct and gut, and sometimes amazing aptitude. Holly was reduced to skin and bones and raw foot pads. Domestic cats rarely pass through the Everglades alive. Do not be ashamed. Who doesn't have a hungry wilderness inside? On the plane, I sat between a Jehovah's Witness and a student of cognitive psychology on his way to an interview at a memory lab. She read aloud her favorite passages about love and judgment. She said, "The Lord gave us a chance to be gardeners, and look what we've done." America, we know seabirds only fly on starry nights, and the dung beetle pushes its golden ball in a straight line, using the Milky Way as its guide. More and more, I try to forget where I am. Who would not feel frightened on a burning planet in a radioactive sea? It's not faith or loyalty, only fact. We are small and a field. Give me your hand in the dark. Okay. I'm going to try not to kill you. I'm going to read one of the Marcus Aurelius poems, just one. I have this other life. Every summer I go home to my hometown, which is at the beach in Wildwood, which is where I go swimming. And I have a record shop there. And I still do it. I've done it for 32 years. So this is set in that store. And it mentions the Quadi and Parthians, and those are like two barbaric tribes, so that they're a lot like tourists on vacation. So book 3. We know not how things, this is from Marcus Aurelius, we know not how many things are signified by the words stealing, sowing, buying, keeping quiet, seeing what ought to be done. This is not affected by the eyes, but by another kind of vision. Remember the Quadi and Parthians. Never allow them into your life. Last night at work, before I knew it, while I was busy selling a t-shirt, the one with the glow-in-the-dark skeleton in the electric chair, to Canadian tourists, an addict convinced me to keep an eye on his 6-year-old son. Slurring something as simple as "don't let him go nowhere," he turned and stepped into the congress of night strollers on the boardwalk. Where did he go? The child wondered. After 10 minutes, he asked, "How long has he been gone?" Soon, though, the father returned, stood in the doorway of the shop, called his son's name once, and they vanished. In his relief, the boy forgot the jarred goldfish he'd won by tossing a coin into its bowl. At midnight, I placed it into the open hand of a sunburnt girl wearing thick black glasses, knee-high socks, and a 14-gauge surgical steel lip ring, having lost somewhere in the past the urge to take so grave a responsibility upon myself. The fish will die. Maybe it's dead already, and I'm tired of feeling sad. What is this other kind of vision that recognizes already the end in sight, that foresees only disaster? Today, I'm giving away 2 bags of clothing I've never worn, and then I'm going to run in place at the gym while I listen to Moby Dick on tape. We discussed puppets and how much he likes the big blocks at school. We considered how slowly time seems to pass when you're waiting. Speaking of how slowly time seems to pass. 2 more poems. They're both new poems. The last poem has Jared Leto in it. That's a tease. Come back after this break. He'll be presenting an Academy Award. This is a poem. This is a poem about acupuncture. I think everyone I know is in love with their acupuncturist. It's a secret. So anyway, this is about my acupuncturist. It's called The Wait, and do you know that song by the band, The Wait? Okay, you can Google it at home. You can listen. You can YouTube it and hear it. And anyway, so it starts with a quote by the guitar player for the band, a guy named Robbie Robertson, and he's talking about a surrealist filmmaker named Buñuel. And he says people like Buñuel would make films that had these religious connotations to them, but it wasn't really necessarily a religious meaning. In Buñuel, these people are trying to be good, and it's impossible to be good. In The Wait, it was this very simple thing. Robbie Robertson. It starts by talking about a Norwegian novel, and by a guy named Knausgaard. Last night, when I closed the book, I was exactly 48 pages into a Norwegian novel, 3,600 pages long. The narrator and his father have just sat down to share in silence a meal of pan-fried chops. It must have taken a kind of faith to have composed this, and it will be an act of devotion to read it through to the end. My acupuncturist says it is not necessary to believe in acupuncture for the needles to work. Lord, may there be a metaphor here for all the mysteries. Each day I walk the line between my belief in the sacred and my disbelief in the divine. Pins in my hands and arms, in my toes and feet, my forehead, sometimes one pin in my chest. Once he cured a head cold with 2 pins in my knee. Sometimes we talk about Oregon or Austin, Colorado, the adrenals, the beets, the liver, the bird theater on Cary Street, the restored pipe organ inside, the bowel, the suboccipital triangle at the base of the skull. He says he is trying to send more blood to my heart. Then he turns out the lights and leaves me alone on the table, and I listen to the traffic on Thompson shush by, old sound banking along a synapse to the room behind the office where I slept those years my parents owned the offshore motel. The tires laid on summer nights, still spinning past toward the beach, high beams sweeping the walls with light. At a yard sale on Saturday, a girl wanted to buy an old suitcase, but her mother wouldn't let her. Maybe we could use bleach, the woman said, but who knows what germs are lurking in there. Yet when I looked, it seemed nearly spotless. The little pouch at the back held only one small pencil, the kind somebody might use to score a round of miniature golf. Sometimes when I couldn't sleep, my father would sing to me, Swinging on a Star, my favorite song, though it was an oldie even then. I hardly ever think of any of this, just as I hardly ever think of my father being anywhere anymore, other than inside the heads of the few of us left who can recall him. He gambled away almost all the money he ever made. Last week, a pilot intentionally flew a plane into the alpine mountain beside which he had glided as a boy. The novelist says the only thing in the face that does not age is the eye. Any change in our vision invisible to those looking in. When the acupuncturist returns, he takes my hand in his small hand. He touches the tips of his fingers to my fingers to see if they have warmed. Lord, these days it is as though I am returned again at every moment from so far away. The worn palm of the world is heavy with time. Okay. And this is the last poem. It's called Beginner's Mind. Beginner's Mind is the name of a sort of seminal text on, like introductory text on Buddhism by Suzuki, and so the epigraph is from the beginning of that book. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. Because for Suzuki, the sufficient mind is not closed, but empty and ready, I am diligently preparing, my computer hypnotically streaming episode after episode of my so-called life on demand. I just realized I have to stop. Do you know this show, My So-Called Life? Okay, if you haven't seen it, you're gonna this is your next YouTube assignment, right? After you listen to The Wait, then you're gonna watch the first episode of it's called My So-Called. It starred Claire Danes and Jared Leto as teenage, like it's a high school drama. All right, okay. Only one season. All right, okay, start over. You know who Neil Young is, right? Okay, yeah, Neil Young. The third assignment. All right. Because for Suzuki, the sufficient mind is not dead, but empty and ready, I am diligently preparing. My computer hypnotically streaming episode after episode of my so-called life on demand. This morning, when I hit the button on the car radio, Neil Young poured out, "Hey, hey, my," and I felt as conflicted as an adolescent. The message of the lyrics, irresistible and wrong. But soon there was only the endless loop of a jumbo jet over the South China Sea, in an instant offline and gone, hour after hour of nothing more to report, punctuated by Russia and Crimea and an interview with Jared Leto, an Academy Award in his palm. Isn't the dream of all technology to trace the history of the stars back to their start? The plot is a constellation of inarticulate angst and charm, his portrayal of teenage opacity perfectly clear. And though, as Suzuki writes, the best way to communicate may be just to sit without saying anything, I would like a panel of experts to discuss the magnetically beautiful and silent, because we cannot keep the bats out of the house. They who can, when studied, wing cleanly through a tight grid of fine wire, somehow still manage to bumble their way in, often only to glide immediately out again, inaudible shadow through an open window, though once, perhaps it was ill already, one crawled into a rubber rain boot in the hall closet to die in the dark. Maybe this is why we cannot stop studying the heavens. Their cry, like the bats, a beacon passing through us at a frequency 2 octaves too high. Given velvet, our dream is of what we cannot see, some ever more astonishing depth beyond. Imagine a whole season of Bill Murray's whispering into the ear of Scarlett Johansson, words just beyond our ability to hear. Already I suspect we will never understand. My dread and sorrow are only the same ineffable dread and sorrow everyone must feel. Before dawn, the birds in the leafless branches plug in their amplifiers and turn it up. And now, into the evening, the red-bellied woodpecker drums on and on. We would like to live like the finch or the fish, yet at best we are the archer aiming only at himself. The series finale couldn't be more ambiguous. Production canceled just as the conflict has finally begun. But there, whenever you want to find it, is the scene in which Jared Leto takes for the first time the manic hand of Claire Danes in his own in the high school hallway. He says, "Can we go somewhere?" And when she says, "Sure," they do. I'm here to answer questions. I know, people are looking terrified, like I'm stuck here for longer. I know that face. Should I give them the opportunity for those who want to go? Should I do that? Are there questions? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Out of all the poems that you read, which one is your favorite?
I like the telephone poem a lot. I kind of like the last one with Jared Leto, but it could be personal. I think it's that one's a little optimistic. There's not a lot of optimism, and there's not. Can you hear me? There's not a lot of optimism, but that one is kind of like, it goes back to like the moment of possibility. That like first like public show of affection. I like thinking about that. Yeah.
As an experienced writer, does there ever come a point where you're truly confident in your abilities, or is it always,
No. There's so many times. Yeah, no, definitely not. Sorry, I know that's not the answer you were looking for.
Well, I kind of was actually.
Okay, yeah, no. Every minute is a racked with self-doubt. I thought I saw their hands. Okay, yeah.
So you probably get this question a lot, but what's your writing process? Do you have like a specific day you like, the time of day you like to write, or?
You get so busy with, when you get like, you have a job and stuff like that. It takes up a lot of time. So I sort of write when I can, as often as I can. But it takes me a long time to build up a reservoir of material, and so I'm not a very fast writer. But right now my process is that I try to write, like, I have certain nights of the week I try to write, like 3 nights of the week I don't do anything but just write. And usually, honestly, a lot of it is really ass power. Like, if you actually sit there, things will happen. If it's not an option, if you're just like, I'm gonna sit here from 8 to 11, and if I don't write anything, but I'm not allowed to leave the chair. You'd be surprised how productive you get, because it's really boring to just sit there for 3 hours. So if you have to do it, you can do it, and usually something good will come out of it. That's just the more surprising thing, is that you actually write some part of something that seems valuable. I'm like a big tinkerer. And lots of times I don't get it right. There's like the moments I was reading tonight where it's like I still haven't gotten that moment. That moment is still not right. But I tinker for a lot. I don't even know, years sometimes. Like what'll happen is I tinker to a point of near completion, and then probably when you get to the point where you're either some journal is going to publish it, or now I'm looking at putting the manuscript together, all that tinkering I'll go right back into like heavy duty tinkering again. Tinkering is so much for me, like, I don't know what to say, easier, better, more pleasurable than the generation. The generation is so hard for me. The tinkering is just like, let me tinker some more. I just sit here and just tinker. Hands? Yeah. Go ahead.
So this question might be a little inappropriate because it's about your personal life. But I'm sure it's on everybody's mind. You mentioned earlier that Walter Benjamin is your boyfriend. I'm just wondering, what kind of lover is he?
It's very personal. But I'm surprised that you haven't. His reputation precedes him. Yeah. He's pretty dynamic. I'm just a sucker for a smart guy, so
Have you ever had any trouble addressing a specific topic or subject matter in your poetry? Like something you got home uncomfortable with but needs to be addressed?
Yes. This is the problem, right? Because there's some things that there's lots of reasons. So you just either think like, I don't really want to write a poem about Walter Benjamin, our sex life. I just feel like that's not like this. I just don't think I could do a good job at that, and that's an easy, because right off the bat, like, that's not going to be good. And so you don't waste a lot of time. But then sometimes you have something you have there's a little discomfort inside you that you get your poem going. Like, usually something has to be prickly, right? So for me anyway, like, there's something, so I'll write my way towards sort of figuring out what it is I'm feeling, and then I figure it out, and I'm like, oh no, no, And I just can't. And so what I want to do is I want to sort of like keep the poem, and I want to write the poem, but I don't want to confront the moment that was the deep, precipitating, emotional truth of the poem. And then you have two choices. You either have to do it, or the poem is going to stink, or you just have to say, okay, I'm not ready to do that, and so this poem is going to go in the drawer for a while until I can either figure out a way to do it in a way that I feel comfortable with, or it'll never come out. But yeah, it's just like it eventually becomes evident to you that you have to make that choice. You decide differently. Some things you realize, like, I can write, you know what you should do? You write the sentence. This is really a poem about X. And if you don't die, then you can keep, then you probably, you might find like you can actually say it. You might be surprised at what you could say and still be breathing. Yeah.
Is there anything you wish you had known when you started writing?
Everything. Like, I still don't know most of it. Yeah. No, I think it was great. I think you don't want to know too much. Like, I think it was good that I didn't know anything in a way, because I wasn't paralyzed by any big expectation for myself. So, somebody said to me, like, you're actually going to publish a book someday. I'd have been like, get out of here. Yeah, so I didn't have any of those things to, or I think it was good not to have ambition like that. It's the guy right behind you had a question.
Do you ever come to question the leaps that you've made when it comes to subject matter of the poems?
Yes. I try to hold my feet to the fire and force myself to articulate the larger idea that I perceive to be the nucleus around which all the parts are orbiting as like electrons, right? And so I try to name that for myself, and if I can't name it, I think there's a problem. Or if I name it and then I realize that one of the electrons is kind of drifting off because it's not accountable. Either I've misnamed either the nucleus has been misnamed. This is a really deep question, right? Or that part has to go. But forcing yourself to name it really brings all of those things into greater focus for you, so you can sort of really, and it helps you then to tweak the diction of the poem towards the actual now discernible subject matter. But sometimes I leap first, and then I say, how did I get to the other side? Like I don't think about where I'm going. I just go. And then afterwards I say, okay, if I wanted somebody to follow me, what directions would I give them? Yes. I think I'm a very essayistic poet. That used to be a criticism, and somehow now people have forgiven it. Now they sort of say it as a neutral term. She's an essayistic poet. Like that's okay. So I don't think it's that. I really love creative nonfiction. So I think poetry and creative nonfiction are neighbors. They live in a 2-family home. Fiction lives across the tracks.
Most of your lines tend to be almost page width, and I think they work wonderfully effectively. Do you ever, in your tinkering process, experiment with shorter lines?
Mm-hmm. Damn, I don't have a good one. But this is kind of shorter, right? Kind of shorter. There's one I wrote a poem that I tried to do an imitation of Matthew Zapruder. And it's in APR. You can probably find it in the library. It's American Poetry Review. They're real little. I did it. It was like a Matthew Zapruder poem for about 6 lines. I maintained it, but the lines didn't change, but it just stopped. I couldn't sustain his voice that long. So yeah, I do. They just tend to feel choppy to me when I put them in. There's lots of reasons why they would be much better if they were shorter. I mean, some of them are coming out. There's a couple poems coming out in Agni, and they actually discussed whether or not I wanted them to be published in the journal sideways, like this. And I was like, no, I don't want them published sideways in the journal. So, it just doesn't seem to be. I don't know what to say. For me, that's the size of my thoughts. They just happen to take up the whole page, or the rhythm of the language in my ear to myself.
This is kind of related. My teacher and I were recently having a discussion about sort of being yourself versus trying to grow. I was going to ask, do you try, and what do you do to try to break yourself out of your automatic style and your way of writing? Like for me, I try to set like formal structures or something, some sort of challenge that I know I don't do.
I tried to write like Matthew Zapruder. Yeah, no, I mean, that's literally what I do. I give myself assignments, like I'm going to write a poem that's only 20 lines long. Or I'm going to write a poem that doesn't reference anyone. Like, no one, there can't be anything in here anyone would have to look up. That's it. It has to be just like really what happened today. And so I give myself those assignments. I think it's really important. And that, sometimes they take the nucleus of one of those and then it becomes like the big typical poem anyway. But it's not, I think you have to change like the Marcus Aurelius poems are really little. Where, look, for me, these are little. And so, yeah, that was it. I gave myself the assignment of keeping them to, I was like, you can't write a poem that goes off of one page. It has to stay on one page. And so, yeah.
What happened on the plane exactly?
Today? The first one, the first plane was declared unfit to fly because of a valve in the defroster. And so we had to wait for a second plane to come. And then the second plane, they loaded us all on the plane, but the coffee maker was leaking, and you can't fly with a leaking coffee maker. So we had a fleet of plumbers.
Why didn't you take out the coffee maker?
There were 100 people suggesting that. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Yes.
In class, we were trying to find out what you meant in your poem, what I meant to say.
Oh.
When you were referencing a book in the line where you said that book which begins with Father Jake.
Oh, it's Seamus Heaney.
So we were trying to find out if that was a book you actually read.
Well, that was a book I was trying to decide whether, I wanted to bring the Seamus Heaney in my backpack to go on the banishment prize, which was now in hindsight, if I knew, there's something I wish I knew, that you could buy Seamus Heaney in Europe, but you can't buy an American poet. So you'd better, you should have left your Seamus Heaney at home because you could find that. But does that help you? Yeah, so that's what I was thinking about. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Why do you write, and who do you write for?
I don't know why I write. I don't know why I write. I write to discover what I don't know I know. So I think I would write even if I didn't publish the poems, because I learn a lot about myself and my own assumptions and opinions and questions and emotional life. I learn about my interior life by writing. So I write my way towards a better understanding of what I'm actually thinking and feeling. And I imagine, a reader who is, I read. Why do I read? I read because I want to encounter a sensibility that interests me. And so I imagine a reader who is interested in thinking about things the way that I'm interested in thinking about them, and willing to go on a little trip, kind of adventurous, leapy trip with me. Does that make sense? Okay.
made a few references to a couple of different artists and music. Do you listen to music while you write? And if so, no?
No, I'm really kind of like a sponge. I would internalize that, and you might say that would be helpful. But if I would internalize a little bit more of the rhythm, a tighter musical rhythm. But I find that it takes me away from what for me is the rhythm the rhythm of the language and into the rhythm of song, which for me, at least, I'm not very sophisticated with music, but seems different. And then too often anything with lyrics is death. So because I can't have words with words, right? So I write in like absolute total silence. I can like barely bear bird song. Is that it? Going once? Twice? No. Yeah.
No, I don't have to answer.
No, go ahead. I know it's going to be a question I can't answer. That's why I always say
no. Okay. I loved your reading. It seems to me that your operative unit is sort of a sentence that's sort of
it's
an
true.
obvious thing, and you're able to create. You need long sentences to kind of finish out a gesture that has a little hint of a narrative, and then boom, by juxtaposition, therein lies the poetry. It's not the formal arrangement of lines. It's in the gaps between sentences. So you have the sentence about the pilot who crashes the plane, and then I believe the one about the eye.
Mm-hmm.
That uncanny sense, and I've heard this too, but that the eye doesn't grow; it's the same size, which is a little.
I think it grows very little bit, like disproportionately into the rest of the body.
So we're struggling to put those things together, and then it's only later in the poem, after you have these narrative gestures, with the gaps between, that you introduce more discourse and less narrative.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Certainly enough. So I'm curious, just as that, using that example, if you might explore what you feel can happen by virtue of leaving the space between those rather than connecting in a more sort of discernible way. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a tough question. Well, I think it leaves room for the mind of the reader to enter into that gap and to experience the. There's a kind of mystery, a little space of not quite a sense of connectedness that is maybe not articulate or maybe not even articulatable, and so, but certainly not. I feel that it's you can sense it, but to articulate it would take a long time and would be pretty boring and long and would require a kind of prose rhythm and not a poetic rhythm.
I guess I get all that. I think
Okay.
I understood that, but I'm thinking about this specific example.
So you think about the jump to the eye?
Yeah, the jump to the eye. There is a sense in which, he returns to a place where he was a child, right? To crash the plane. So I'm thinking that this might have to do with childhood, but it also has to do with the withheld internal life.
That's what I was thinking. Here he's become this
recurring thing, the steely protagonist,
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't reveal.
Yeah, and the speaker also is a very, sort of says like, oh, couldn't it be better than this? It was just like the imagined life more better than the lived life would have been, right? Longing, 3-part salt. Does that make any sense at all? So yeah, there is a kind of disconnect between a sense of dislocation between the interior world of the other, right, the unknowable other, but also the sort of withheld and unknowable self, like the self that is half known to itself, but also intentionally occluded from the rest of the world. Is that answering your question in any way?
Well, yeah.
No, I think I would say that definitely though I definitely compose by the sentence. I do not compose by the line, and the gestures of the poem. Any music whatever music the poems maybe have and it may be limited is a rhetorical music. It's a music that's based on a sort of syntactical patterning.
Yeah, I guess all I'm suggesting is that, I mean, the question of why you write, discover, etc., discover. But I think you also write to reach this liminal space where you cannot go any farther, and you're real excited about that space, being in the presence of the unknown, and there's something that you do not want to violate in that space.
I like it. Yeah, that's beautiful. I'll use that next time I get asked that question. Oh no! Look. Now there's another question. Yes, go ahead.
How do you think you'd feel if you had heard that Jared Leto had found out you wrote about him?
I actually had a similar feel. I had a. So I met Patti Smith, and she told me she'd given Johnny Depp the Dead Man poem. I'm waiting. My phone has not rung. So he clearly, I don't know what to say. I mean, I guess, he's newlywed. He's distracted. No, I'd be fine with it. I think. I say like talk about the magnetically beautiful and silent. Whenever he starts talking, I want to go shh. No, shh. It's going to be so much better. Don't say it. So yeah. That's it. Maybe that's a good place to end. What a creepy thought. Yeah, go ahead.
So I know that you're very well read. It's obvious, especially with how many references you use. But I'm curious of how much research that you actually do on the people and the things that you reference in your songs.
The problem is you can only get your poem can only hold this much, really heavy research, right? And so if you can know this much, right, but you still only get to use that much. I try to do. Usually, I just have read a whole book, and so what it is that whatever's in it that was the exhilaration, a moment of exhilaration in the text that I remember that stuck, is what comes out of it. So I usually will have read I read a book called The Mind in the Cave, and it was all about Paleolithic art. That's the only book I've ever read on Paleolithic art. I did a little bit of supplemental research because there were some things in the book I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. So I did to research to understand what it was I was reading, but that was all that I just read. It was a pretty big book. But.
So as you write, you just write what you remember. You don't then go back and.
Well, I go back then to make sure that I don't get it wrong, but I don't. But I try to just. Yeah, I try to see what's if I don't remember it, it can't be I don't know. It didn't move me, right? And the poem is going to be. I want the poem to be animated by something in the book. Something I read reverberated right against something else, and so I want the strings and the internal things to be moving around. You guys gotta want to go home. Go. All right. Go.